first lesson for reading and writing, which is the reading and writing connection. So for today, we will try to identify what is reading and what is writing, as well as similarly establish the connection between the two. Okay, we will also be talking about the different reasons why do we read and write, and what do we get from these two activities. So before we start, I'd like you to answer this question. Which of these two do you think came first? Is it the chicken or is it the egg? If you think it's the chicken, you probably have your own reasons. Similarly, if you think it's the egg, you probably have your own reasons. I've heard different responses before wherein students would answer that, ma'am, it's the chicken because the letter C comes first before the letter E in the dictionary. And then some of my students would rebut with the idea that if you translate these two terms in Filipino or in our local language, it has to be the egg that came first because itlog comes, or the letter I comes first before the letter M, which is the beginning letter of the word manok, which is the Tagalog term for chicken. So there have been a lot of funny responses regarding this one, and it's been a long-standing debate, not just in common folks or among common folks, but also in the scientific community as well. So I'd like to relate this debate about the chicken and the egg to the debate as to whether which is more important. Is it reading or is it writing? So some of you might think that it's reading that should be what we are focusing on. It's a skill that we should be focusing on. Some would think that it's writing. Okay. However, I'd like to point out that it's not always the case. Okay. And we have to know that reading and writing are connected in a way that they go hand in hand. They always go hand in hand. One can stand, one cannot stand without the other. Okay. So it's important to note that reading is always related to writing, as well as similarly, writing is just as important it is to reading. Okay, so let's try to define the terms first. When it comes to reading, according to Lapp and Flood in 1978, it's defined into two types, okay, accordingly. So the first type is reading is considered to be a decoding process. So what do we mean by decoding? When we say decoding, it's breaking down of written codes. And when we say written codes, we are simply referring to the letters, the words, okay, the symbols that represents an idea, a concept. Take for example, before you can form letters, you have to draw lines first. So once you draw lines, combine them together, they can form letters. When you combine letters, you can form words. When you combine words, you then form sentences. And when you combine sentences, you can form essays. Okay, so reading is similar to that. We are trying to decode those written codes and symbols. The second process, according to Lapp and Flood, is reading is considered to be a comprehension process. It is not enough that you were able to identify that this code is a code. Or for example, if there are two parallel lines and two lines that are parallel to each other and there's a line in the middle, it's the letter H. Okay, it's not enough for us to identify that it's the letter H. We know that it's the letter H because we understand that those symbols are representing something. So similarly, that understanding is what we call comprehension. You are trying to find meaning. We are trying to give these symbols, these written codes, meaning. Okay, so basically that's what reading is all about for Lapp and Flood. All right. Now, reading involves different processes. The first process, according to them, is word recognition. Like what I have mentioned earlier, when we say word recognition, we were able to identify that these certain letters, when combined together, form a particular word. Take, for example, when we see the letters W, O, R, D, and they are put together in that particular order, then that means we can read it as word. Okay? The next thing that we have to remember is that reading also involves comprehension. So that means it's understanding. When you see the letters WORD and you already figured out, you already put in your mind that it spells out a word. Now, the next step that your brain does, okay, as it goes through the process of reading, is that it tries to understand what are those symbols, what are those symbols representing, or what is that particular word trying to give us meaning. Okay, so when you say word, you already know that, oh, it's something that I can read, something that I can hear, all right, something that I can write. So when you try to give meaning to those symbols, that is comprehension. All right, the next thing that we have to remember, the process that is involved when it comes to reading, is fluency. And when we say fluency, that's how effective you are using the language to express yourself. So how effectively can you recognize words or other written symbols or other written codes? How effectively can you put meaning to it? That is fluency. All right. Now, one factor that affects all of these, according to Lap and Flood, it's not going to be possible if you're not really motivated. So if you're not motivated to read, or you're not motivated to understand these symbols, then you will not be reading them at all. So motivation plays an important role in the process, or in the reading process. Okay. Now, why do we read? What are the reasons for reading? Some people read so that they can develop a broad background regarding a certain topic, regarding a certain concept, or about a certain idea. Some people, they read because they want to anticipate and predict certain things. Take for example, when people are sorry, we are talking about people who are looking into weather patterns. So even if, despite of not not really reading words, but rather reading what the machines tell them to, okay, they are still able to anticipate and predict what would be the weather for the day, okay, or the changes in the weather for the next few days. So it's not just reading books. It's not just reading sentences, okay, or essays. It could also be reading machines, all right, which can help us anticipate and predict certain things. All right. The next thing is, we also read because we want to create motivation and interest. We just want to motivate ourselves to do other things. Take, for example, if you look into self-help books, it it creates an idea in your head that you have to do certain things to be able to be certain, to achieve a certain goal. Okay? So that's, in a way, that's creating motivation. And take for example, if your friend um if your friend is interested in one thing, then he or she might be reading up on it and tell you about it. Now that creates interest, and you in turn would be reading about it as well. Okay, so there are many reasons. The fourth one is to build a good vocabulary. I think it goes hand in hand when it comes to reading, or when we read. All right. Whenever you read, you encounter a lot of words. So you encounter words that you are familiar with. You encounter words that you are less familiar with, or sometimes words that you haven't encountered with. Okay. So when you read, it also helps you build a good vocabulary. Next, we read mainly, I think this is the reason why most of us read. It's mainly for pleasure and enjoyment. We just want to escape. Okay, reading as a form of escape. So you just want to escape, you want to have fun, you want to enjoy, you just want to relax, you just want to pass time. Okay? So mainly this is the main reason why we read, for pleasure and enjoyment. All right, some benefits of reading include, the first one is, as a reader, you are being exposed to accurate spelling and correct forms of writing. So most of the things that we read went through a tedious process of um, checking, grammar check, and spelling check. Take for example. So as readers who consume those pieces of writing, we are then exposed to the correct forms. All right. The second one is that it shows readers how we can write more complex sentences. Reading enables us to understand better, to understand longer pieces of information. Okay. So we, in turn, once we develop our understanding of that, we can actually apply it to ourselves and use that skill. So in turn, you will be able to use it when you write your own. Okay. The third one, it also invites readers to be more experimental in their own writing. So, like what I have mentioned earlier, when you read it, you can also adapt it to your writing process. The fourth one is it allows readers to hear the thoughts of others. Some people, they express themselves through writing, which in turn, they let other people read. So as a reader, you can put yourself into the shoes of others. Okay, take for example, you're reading a novel and you can relate. When you say you can relate to a certain character, you are being allowed to the thoughts of that character. Or maybe that character was built up. That character was actually built up or created from the mind of the writer. So it might be an expression of the writer's thoughts as well. So in that way, you are being let in. A door is being opened for you to come in and explore what is going on in the thoughts of other people. Or in a take for example in fictional world, fictional works. Okay, you are being allowed or being allowed to enter into the minds of the characters. So these are just some of the benefits of reading. All right, now let's go over to writing. When we write, all right, it's simply a method of representing language in a visual or tactile form. So when we say visual, it's something that we can see, and when we say tactile, it's something that we can touch, we can hold. Okay, writing is mainly composed of writing symbols. So that means letters. Letters, again, like writing lines, letters, and then forming words from those letters, and then eventually moving on to sentences and longer essays. Okay? Next, it's also a system of graphic symbols that can be used to convey meaning. Take, for example, again, when we see symbols such as take for example the two parallel lines. Let's go back to letter writing first. Two parallel lines. So two parallel lines with a line in the middle. That means that it's the letter H. So it already represents the letter H. When you see two parallel lines with a line in the middle, then you always assume that it's the letter H because it is the meaning that we have already associated with it. So no matter where you go, that's what you can see. Okay. Next, why do we write? We write simply because we just want to express ourselves. We write because we want to describe different things. We want to give meaning. We want to give life to different things. That's the reason why we write. Okay, and by describing meaning, we use different adjectives. We try to identify different properties of certain things, um, such as color, size, and so on and so forth. Okay, we also write because we want to explore and learn. Okay, similarly, we write because we want to entertain ourselves. Some people actually make a living out of writing, and in turn, okay, a lot of those people actually take pleasure in doing that, and it's a way of entertaining themselves as well. Okay, we write because we want to inform. We want to give out information to other people. We want to be a resource for information, ideas, thoughts, and messages. All right. We also write because we want to explain. We write because we want to persuade. When we say persuade, we just want to convince other people. We want to influence them, influence their way of thinking. And we write because we also want to solve problems. Now, what are the benefits of writing? How do we benefit from writing? The first thing that it allows us to do is that as writers, when we write, we can voice out our thoughts. It doesn't just stay in our head. Okay, there's an avenue for us to express whatever is in our mind, and that is mostly through writing. If you cannot voice it out verbally, then through writing you can voice it out. Okay, the next thing is that it also provides writers with a vehicle to use their imaginations. It's sometimes what we write, it's always open for interpretation. So other people can give different meanings to what we write, okay? Especially if you're writing a fictional work or a literary work. Okay, now for writers who are into writing fictional or literary work, creatively writing down their thoughts, then their imagination is their number one source of information. Everything is made up in their heads. And as readers, consuming someone's writing, then it's a treat for us. Okay, it's a treat for us to be looking into someone else's made up or conjured up world, or simply from their imagination. Okay, the third one is that as writers, we are also given a chance to engage in a conversation with other writers. So it allows us to interact with other people, especially those who engage in the same form of writing. Next, it also aids writers in reading critically of other works. So as a writer, and you try to compare yourself when you see or when you read other write-ups, take for example, you try to compare it to what you have done. Okay? So therefore, you try to analyze yourself for self-improvement. Oh, how can I write like this? And then you try to adapt it and apply it to yourself. What you have learned from others, what you think could be improved on, okay, you can adapt it to yourself. The fifth one is that it motivates writers to engage with the text they are reading. So what does it mean? I think most of you here like to take down notes. So whatever you are reading, whatever you are listening to, some of you might be, or most of you rather, would be taking down notes. And in that way, when you are taking down notes, you are actually interacting or engaging with whatever you are reading or whatever you are listening to. And you take it down, and when you are taking down notes, obviously you are simply writing. Okay, another thing that supports this idea is that whenever you read something, and then take for example, you like a particular quotation from that book or from that write up, then you try to underline it or highlight it. And then some people would even write down their thoughts on the books or the write ups itself. Okay, so in that way, that's a way of engaging to whatever you are reading or consuming or even listening to. Okay, so I before we end this discussion, I'd like to point out this quote by Pam Allen, which I found on the internet. For Pam Allen, reading is like breathing in, whereas writing is like breathing out. So when you read, you are trying to consume things. Okay, you are putting it into yourself. And when you write, that's your way of bringing them out to the world, sharing it. Okay, so I guess that's it. Here are my sources.